Welcome to Dark Hour Tales. Tonight's tale is The Empty Ship. By the autumn of 1898, Thomas Avery had spent nearly half his life at sea and had learned that most frightening things became less frightening once a man understood what caused them. A strange light on the horizon usually belonged to another vessel. A knocking beneath the deck was generally timber working against iron. A voice heard during a night watch could be carried by wind from farther across the water than seemed possible. Sailors in Avery's experience were particularly skilled at turning ignorance into superstition. It was why when Ned Collins called down from the lookout shortly after midday and said there was a ship to the northwest that did not appear to be moving, Avery reached first for his telescope rather than his imagination. The SS Meridian was 11 days out from Liverpool and bound for Halifax with machinery, textiles, and enough general freight packed into her holds to make Captain Edwin Harrow complain about the loading clerk every time the ship rolled heavily. She was not a beautiful vessel, but she was dependable. Her iron hull had survived worse seas than the gray Atlantic currently rolling beneath them, and the engines had behaved themselves for most of the crossing. Avery climbed to the bridge and took the glass from Collins. "Where?" Collins pointed. "Just off the mist there." The weather had been strangely mild since morning. The wind was weak and the sea had settled into long, dark swells that lifted the Meridian gently before lowering her again. Thin strips of fog lay along the horizon like smoke. Avery found the vessel. She sat several miles away, broadside to them. "Steamer?" Captain Harrow asked. "Aye." "Making way?" "Not that I can see." Harrow took the telescope. Avery watched his expression. The captain was 56, broad across the shoulders and almost completely bald, except for a stubborn ring of white hair above his ears. 27 years at sea had given him the habit of considering every decision several seconds longer than seemed necessary. "Signal her." The Meridian changed course. As they drew closer, more men gathered at the rail. The unknown vessel was a cargo steamer similar in size to their own. Her hull sat correctly in the water. No smoke rose from the funnel, but there was no visible damage either. Her masts were intact, and nothing suggested collision or fire. Daniel Mercer leaned over the rail beside his older brother. "Maybe they've all gone for lunch." Jacob Mercer snorted. "Whole ship? Good lunch." Jacob shoved his shoulder. Daniel was 20 and on only his second Atlantic crossing. His brother, 7 years older, had been at sea since 16 and treated Daniel's presence aboard the Meridian as both a source of pride and an ongoing inconvenience. The signal flag went unanswered. Harrow ordered, the whistle sounded. The deep blast rolled across the water. Nothing moved on the other ship. Samuel Price, the Meridian's carpenter, joined Avery at the rail. "Could be engine trouble." "Then they have eyes," Avery said. Price scratched his beard. "Unless they're all below." Behind them, Elias Rourke said, 20 men below at once?" Price looked back. Rourke was the oldest working sailor aboard the Meridian and looked older than his 52 years. Wind and salt had carved deep lines around his eyes, and his beard had gone almost entirely gray. "You've an explanation, Elias?" Price asked. "Not one you'll enjoy." "I rarely do." Rourke watched the silent vessel. "A ship without a man on deck isn't inviting you aboard." Price smiled. "Ships don't invite anyone anywhere." "No," Rourke said. "Exactly." By 3 o'clock, the vessels were less than half a mile apart. The name painted across the other ship's stern became visible. Bellwether. Captain Harrow searched his shipping records but found nothing useful beyond the name of a British merchant vessel registered out of Bristol. No distress signal had been raised. No boat approached them. There was no movement anywhere on deck. Harrow lowered his telescope. "We'll send a party." Rourke muttered something under his breath. Harrow ignored him. "Avery, you lead. Take Price." Price nodded. "Mercer." Both brothers looked up. Harrow pointed at Daniel. "The young one." Jacob grinned. Daniel tried not to look pleased. "And Rourke." Rourke stared at the captain. "Sir." "Problem?" "Not if you're ordering me." "I am." "Then no problem." A boat was prepared. Before Daniel climbed down, Jacob caught his sleeve. "If you find gold, I get half." If I find gold, I'm retiring before you see me again. You owe me 8 shillings. I'll post it. Jacob laughed. It was the last time Daniel ever saw his brother smiling. The crossing took less than 10 minutes. As they approached the bellwether, Avery searched the rail for movement. There was none. The hull rose beside them, black and wet. A boarding ladder hung down one side. That bothered Avery. Someone had lowered it. He climbed first. The deck above was empty. Price followed, then Daniel, with Rourke last. Avery called out, "Bellwether!" His voice traveled across the open deck and disappeared into the sea. No answer. They waited. The silence of a large ship was unlike silence anywhere else. A house could be empty. A church could be empty. But a working vessel had a pulse even when men slept. Rope moved. Boots struck timber. Engines breathed through metal. Someone coughed, shouted, cursed, or dropped something. The bellwether seemed to contain none of it. Price crossed toward the forward hatch. Cargo hatch open. Avery joined him. The hatch had been left partly raised. A coil of rope lay beside it, half secured. Price crouched. Someone stopped halfway through. Could have been ordered off deck. For what? Avery looked around. That's what we're here to learn. They searched the upper deck first. No bodies, no blood, no indication of violence. One bucket had rolled against the rail and rested there. A pair of work gloves sat beside a winch. At the stern, Daniel looked down. Boats are here. Avery turned. Every lifeboat remained secured. Rourke looked at him. There's your first answer. To what? They didn't abandon her. They entered through the main companionway. The air inside was cool and stale. The galley held the first sign that people had been aboard recently. 4 bowls stood on a table. One contained the dried remains of stew. A mug lay on its side. Price lifted a loaf of bread and pressed his thumb into it. Not fresh. How long? Avery asked. Several days, maybe less. Daniel opened a cupboard. Food's still here. Avery looked through the doorway toward the passage. No shouting, no footsteps, nothing. The officers' quarters were equally strange. Clothes remained in drawers. A pair of spectacles rested on an open book beside one bunk. Another bed was unmade, the blanket hanging almost to the floor. Daniel picked up a pipe from a small table. Wouldn't leave this. Rourke said, Depends why you're leaving. They checked the engine room. Price spent nearly 15 minutes inspecting machinery. The boilers were cold. There had been no explosion, no catastrophic failure, no flooding. He came back wiping his hands. Nothing here would have made them take to the boats. The boats are still aboard, Daniel said. Price looked at him. Exactly. Avery's unease deepened not because they had found something frightening, but because they had found nothing. Every sensible explanation required evidence that wasn't there. Disease should have left sick men or bodies. Piracy should have left damage. Evacuation should have required boats. Rescue by another vessel might explain the missing crew, but not why they had apparently walked away from food, clothing, cargo, and personal belongings without leaving any obvious record. They reached the captain's cabin near the end of the hour. The logbook lay on the desk. Avery opened it. The first pages he checked were ordinary. Position, weather, coal consumption, a repair to a steam line, one crewman recovering from fever. Then, 6 days earlier, sighted unidentified vessel northwest. No response to signal. Avery read the next entry aloud. Vessel apparently abandoned. Captain ordered boat lowered. Second officer Hale and 3 men sent aboard. Daniel looked up. 4. Avery glanced at him. What? 4 men went across. Price shrugged. So? Nothing. The next entry, boarding party returned shortly before dusk. No persons found aboard. Vessel appeared seaworthy. Rourke moved closer. Avery turned the page. 4 men returned from the vessel. Hale reports nothing of value concerning her crew. Rourke tapped the line with one finger. There. Price sighed. What now? Why write that? Because 4 went. And 4 came back. Yes? Rourke held his gaze. Then why does it need saying? Price looked toward Avery as if asking permission to dismiss him. Avery kept reading. The following entry mentions Second Officer Hale insisting that the abandoned vessel should be left behind. Another recorded complaints of sounds from empty compartments below deck. Then, unable to account for Cooper and Finch at morning muster. Search made throughout ship. Daniel stopped smiling. Avery turned the page. 3 additional men absent, boats secured, no sign of disturbance. The handwriting changed after that. It became smaller, less controlled. The final completed entry contained only one sentence. We have sighted another vessel. Nobody spoke. Price eventually said, could have been illness. Rourke laughed once without humor. Illness that removes 5 men and leaves their boots? Men panic. Into the sea? Maybe. 5? Avery closed the book. We're taking this back. Daniel looked toward the cabin window. We've been longer than an hour. Avery checked his watch. Nearly 2. They returned to the deck. The Meridian was still visible across the water. For a moment that reassured Avery. Then Daniel waved. No one waved back. Avery walked to the rail. The deck of the Meridian looked empty. Ned! He shouted. Nothing. Price cupped both hands around his mouth. Meridian. Silence. Rourke stared across at the ship. Daniel said, Jacob will be below. Avery didn't answer. They lowered themselves into the boat. The row back seemed longer. As they approached the Meridian, Daniel repeatedly called his brother's name. No face appeared above them. No rope was thrown down. They had to catch the ladder themselves. Daniel climbed first. Jacob! Avery followed. The deck was empty. Captain! Nothing. Price headed toward the bridge. Rourke remained beside Avery. I don't like this. Neither did Avery. Daniel disappeared through the crew passage. Jacob! Avery entered the galley. A pot simmered on the stove. Steam rose gently from beneath the lid. A loaf of bread sat on the table. Half of it had been sliced. The knife lay beside it. Arthur Bell was nowhere to be seen. Avery touched the pot handle. Hot. They had not been gone long enough for this to be anything but recent. Price returned from the bridge. Nobody. Captain's cabin? Empty. Avery walked there himself. Captain Harrow's glasses rested beside the open ship's register. His pen lay uncapped across the page. Daniel shouted from somewhere below. Avery ran. He found him beside the crew quarters. Daniel held a metal mug. Jacob's. Avery knew it before Daniel said so. Jacob had carved his initials into the handle years earlier. Daniel touched the liquid inside. Still warm. Nobody knew what to say. They searched the Meridian from bow to stern. Every cabin, every hold accessible without equipment, the engine room, storage compartments, the boats remained secured. 21 men had vanished. No bodies, no blood, no broken doors, no signs of struggle. One watchman's coat still hung beside the deck hatch. Ned Collins' cap remained near the lookout position. The ship was intact. The sea around them was empty except for the bellwether. Daniel stood at the rail staring at it. It happened while we were over there. Price said, we don't know that. The tea's warm. We don't know what happened at all. Daniel turned. My brother was here. I know. Then where is he? Price had no answer. Rourke did. Same place as theirs. Avery looked at him sharply. Enough. You read the book. I read what someone wrote. And now we're standing inside it. That silenced everyone. Avery ordered the Meridian underway. It was not simple with 4 men, but they did not need speed. They needed distance. The engines came reluctantly to life. Smoke returned to the funnel. Avery set them on an easterly course toward shipping lanes they had passed days earlier. The bellwether began to fall behind. Daniel remained near the stern for almost an hour, watching it. Price eventually joined him. Go below. Eat something. I'm not hungry. Nobody is. Daniel stared toward the horizon. It's still there. Price looked. The bellwether remained visible through the thinning mist. Of course it is. We've been moving an hour. So has the current. Daniel said nothing. Another hour passed. The bellwether should have been gone. It wasn't. Sometimes fog obscured her. Whenever it cleared, there she was again. Not closer, not farther, simply present. Price checked their compass, then checked it again. Avery noticed. Problem? Nothing I can prove. What? Price lowered his voice. Heading doesn't match the swell. Avery looked toward the sea. Compass fault? Maybe. Can you fix it? If it's the compass. Rourke had been listening. You can't sail away from a place if the place doesn't want you leaving. Price turned. For God's sake. Rourke smiled faintly. You've another explanation? That evening, fog moved in from the north. It did not arrive dramatically. The horizon simply shortened. The bellwether vanished into it. Daniel seemed relieved. Then, shortly after sunset, Avery heard him shout. Jacob! He ran toward the sound. Daniel stood beside the passage leading below deck. Did you hear that? Hear what? My brother. Avery looked into the darkness. Daniel. He called me. From where? Below. Daniel started forward. Avery caught his arm. No. That's Jacob. You don't know that. I know his voice. Your brother isn't down there. Daniel pulled free. How do you know? Avery had no answer strong enough to satisfy him. They searched together. No Jacob. No one. When they returned to the deck, Rourke was gone. Price was the first to notice. Elias? They checked the chart room. His pipe lay on the table, still warm. Avery stared at it. Daniel whispered, No. They searched again. Nothing. 3 men remained. That night none of them slept. The fog thickened. At around 2 a.m, a ship's bell rang somewhere beyond the Meridian. One strike, then another. Daniel lifted his head. Price looked toward Avery. The bell sounded again. Through the fog emerged the bow of the bellwether. Daniel stepped backwards. It should not have been there. They had left it hours earlier under power, yet it drifted past them barely 100 yards away. No lights, no crew, no sound except water against its hull. Then Daniel shouted, Jacob! Avery grabbed him. At the bellwether's rail, something had moved, or perhaps the fog had shifted. Daniel struggled. He's there. There's nobody there. I saw him. Daniel! Jacob! The bellwether slid into the mist. Daniel stopped fighting. He began to cry. Not loudly. Avery held him until the vessel disappeared. By dawn, Price was gone. Avery woke sitting against the bridge wall. Daniel slept nearby. Price had been at the engine controls less than an hour earlier. His tools remained beside them. The engines were still running. No Price. Daniel stared at the empty space. Where next? Avery said nothing. They reduced speed. There seemed little point in choosing a direction anymore. The compass now showed west despite the sunrise appearing where Avery expected east. He stopped trusting it. Daniel grew quieter throughout the morning. Around midday he asked, Do you think they're dead? Avery knew who he meant. I don't know. My brother. I know. If they're not dead, where did they go? Avery looked out at the blank horizon. I don't know. Daniel laughed bitterly. You've said that a lot. Aye. So has everyone. For a while they sat without speaking. Then Daniel's head turned. Avery saw the change in his face. What? Daniel stood. Jacob? Avery heard nothing. Daniel walked toward the stern. Daniel, he's calling. No. Daniel moved faster. Avery followed. The deck ahead was empty. Jacob! Daniel reached the rail. The bellwether was there. No fog concealed it now. It floated perhaps 200 yards away on a flat gray sea. Daniel stared. He's on it. Avery saw no one. Come away. He's there. Daniel climbed onto the lower rail. Avery pulled him down. Daniel struck him, not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to shock both of them. Let me go. There's nobody there. You don't know that. Avery forced him back. Daniel fought until exhaustion took him. When Avery finally released him, the young man collapsed against the deck. The bellwether drifted away. Neither watched it disappear. Near sunset, Avery went below for water. He was gone less than 3 minutes. When he returned, Daniel was missing. Avery searched until darkness came. He called Daniel's name until his throat hurt. Nothing answered. The Meridian belonged to him alone. For the first time since childhood, Thomas Avery prayed, not eloquently, not even hopefully. He simply sat in Captain Harrow's chair and asked whatever might be listening to let him see another human face. At dawn, the bellwether was gone. Avery searched the horizon repeatedly. Nothing. He almost laughed. The compass behaved normally again. The sea had regained its swell. A weak wind moved from the west. For 2 days, Avery kept the Meridian running as best he could. He slept in minutes rather than hours. No one disappeared because there was no one left. No voices called him. No bells sounded. No other ship followed. On the third morning, he saw smoke. At first, Avery thought exhaustion had invented it. Then a mast appeared. Then a hull. A working steamer was approaching from the east. Avery stood at the rail and waved both arms. He fired a signal flare. The other vessel answered. He could see men gathering along its deck. Something inside him broke. He laughed and cried at once. The vessel changed course toward him. Avery stumbled toward the bridge to prepare a signal flag. As he passed Captain Harrow's desk, he stopped. The Meridian's logbook lay open. Avery did not remember opening it. He approached slowly. There was writing beneath the last entry made before the crew vanished. Fresh ink, 1 line, 4 men coming aboard. Avery stared at the words. Outside, voices carried across the water. He walked to the rail. The approaching vessel had stopped several hundred yards away. A boat was being lowered. Men climbed into it. Avery counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. He backed away from the rail. No. The 4 sailors began rowing toward the Meridian. Avery shouted, "Go back!" They were too far away. Or perhaps they couldn't understand. He waved his arms. "Don't come aboard!" The men continued rowing. Avery turned toward the bridge. For an instant, he thought he heard something below deck. A boot on metal. Then another. He froze. From somewhere deep inside the Meridian came the sound of a ship's bell. 1 strike. Avery looked toward the sea. There was no bellwether. Only the approaching boat. Another strike, then silence. The 4 men reached the Meridian. No one stood at the rail to receive them. They called out. No answer. Their officer climbed first, then the second man, then the third, then the fourth. The deck was empty. The engines were cooling. A signal flare still smoldered where it had fallen. In the captain's cabin, the logbook lay open on the desk. There was no sign of Thomas Avery. Beyond the windows stretched an empty ocean. The men searched the ship. They found food, clothing, tools, personal belongings. They found no bodies, no damaged boats, no reason for the crew to have left. And several miles away, beyond a thin bank of morning mist, another vessel drifted slowly into view. It did not answer their signals.